Holding out Tzaddik Amud Aleph, continuing the different objects that a person may remove from Rishus HaYachid, what quantity is considered significant, and therefore he'll be chayiv for. So the Mishnah mentioned different types of dyes. Klipi agoizim, the outer husk, the outer peel of nuts, the green one, klipi rimoinim, pomegranate peels, stis, upua, different types of plants. So all those dyes, beget cotton, the size that you can dye the small cloth on the top of the net that the women would wear on their hair. So we see that the quantity for dye is to dye that piece of cloth. V'ramini, we have a contradiction to this from an earlier Mishnah. The Mishnah said, Hamoitzi samonim shruyin, one who removes a liquid dye, a dye that was already soaked in water, and I could already use it to dye some cloth. If I can dye with that a small piece of cloth as a sample, which is the same size as what the cloth that they would use to stuff the stick that they would use when they were weaving. They held the erev on it, the thread that they would throw in to the width. They would wrap it around a certain bamboo, and they would stuff the hole with a piece of cloth. So it's a very small size. It's smaller than the cloth on the tip of this net. So we see that dye is significant less than this tip of the net. How come the Mishnah is saying that it's only significant if it can dye that tip of the net? Answers the Gemara, Omar, Rav Nachman, Omar Rabbi Baravua. The reason is like this. There's a difference between ingredients that you could make dye or ready dye. Ingredients that you could make dye, you have to soak, you have to cook. You wouldn't do it for a sample. But if you have a liquid dye, put a sample inside and take it out, I would do that. So I would save liquid prepared dye for a sample. However, ingredients to make dye, I would only use if I can dye the tip of the net. A person does not bother to soak the ingredients for dye, to dye just this sample or the stuffer for this stick for the weaver. And therefore the size for ingredients is only if you can create from that dye for the tip of the net. Fine. Okay, then the Gemara continues, Meira Glaim, that was used in those days as a cleansing agent. Tana Meira Glaim Ad Ben Mem Yoim. There's different ways how to learn this. Either it has to be 40 days old, then it became sour, then it could be used as a cleansing agent. Or, according to Tosfos, it's from 3 days until 40 days, then it can be used as a cleansing agent. After that, it's already spoiled and will not be able to be used as a cleansing agent. Neser, it's a certain ingredient, natron it's called. Tana, we learned in Abraisa, Neser Alexandris, only from the city of Alexandria. V'lei Neser and Pantarin, from the city and Pantaria was useless. So it only would work if it was from Alexandria. Fine. Boiris, another cleansing agent. What is that? Amar Rav Yehuda Zechoil, sand. They would use sand as a cleansing agent. Says the Gemara, it cannot be. Vatani, we learned in Abraisa, ha-boiris v'ha-choil. There's boiris and there's sand, two separate things. Ella, says the Gemara, my boiris kavriso. Sulfur. Sulfur was also used as a cleansing agent. Maybe that's what boiris is. Meisive, says the Gemara, no. We have a Baraisa regarding Shemitah, which Shemitah only applies to plants, not to doinen, not to inanimate, not to things that don't grow. And it says over there, Chachamim made a gzeira that in the Isurim of Shemitah are also included hachalbitzin, v'ali'inun, different types of plants, v'haboiris, v'ha'al, v'ha'al. All these plants, including boiris, were also included in the Isra of Shvius. The Chiddush was they're not proper food. They're plants, but they're not proper foods. And like this, boiris, for example, is a cleansing agent. Owl is also a cleansing agent. So or it's a perfume. It's not a food. So v'isal kadaitach kavrisa, if you would say it's sulfur, kavrisa meisa v'shvis, did Chacham make a gzeira on sulfur that there should be an isra of shmita? V'atani, we learned in a braysa, Zakal is a rule. Kol sheyesh lo ikar, anything which has a root, which grows, yesh lo shvis. V'she'ein lo ikar, if it has no root, ein lo shvis. So how can he say that sulfur has the isra of shvis? So it can't be sulfur. Elamai boidis Allah. Wait 1 second. Vatani will learn in a braysa v'ha boidis v'Allah. Clearly, 2 separate things. So the answer is Trei Gavnei Allah. It is a plant, a cleansing agent, a soap root, something which they would use for soap. That's what they call it today, or not today, but in the Shulchan Aruch, it's called soap. Is called boidis. It was the basic plant they would use for soap, and it was a type of ahol. But there was 2 types. One was called ahol, one was called boidis. Fine. So it's a plant that was used as a base for soap. Kimolia, what's kimolia? Amar Rabbi Yehuda shloif doitz. Now Rashi doesn't know what it is. So I obviously don't know what it is. It's a certain plant, another cleansing agent that would grow, which was called shloif doitz or kimolia. So I think I don't know if this is this or another or the next one. Some Rishonim translate as alkali. I don't know. Ashlag, okay, another cleansing agent. Says the Gemara, Amar Shmuel Sheiltino, I asked the Kol Mechusayama, all the sea travelers. That wasn't a regular thing those days. People usually stuck to dry land. Traveling in the sea was a great danger. But I asked those that were sea travelers, and they traveled to Europe, I guess, away from Babel, and they had seen more things, more merchandise, and more object than the people in Babel usually saw. And I asked them, what is this ashlag? They told him, okay, shunana shmei. It's called shunana. It helped him. It doesn't help us much, but it's called shunana. And umishtakach, he could find it benukva de marganisa, in a hole in pearls. Umafkele, you have to remove it beramso de parza, with a special instrument, a metal instrument with a very thin end to it. They could pick out that shunana, which is called ashlag, which is found in pearls, which can be used as a cleansing agent. Fine? Now these are all the different objects that the Mishnah mentioned, with different sizes that have different halachas when you're chayiv for carrying them. Very short.
In other words, all these chemicals are known. For example, meraglaim, it's ammonia.
Ammonia.
And the other thing are potassium.
Mm-hmm.
And the other thing is ashlag is potassium.
Mm-hmm.
And they are actually nowadays produced chemically, not using plants at all. So when the other thing I wanted to say at the time, but you didn't let me talk, and the other one is boric acid or borax, which is used for cleaning. And it's still used, but borax is actually used for other things. But I thought that I'll show off a bit anyway.
Okay.
So these are the words translation, but I couldn't find the translation for something that even Rashi couldn't find. So he wins.
Fine. Next Mishnah with more examples. Pilpeles kolshuhu. Pepper, a small amount, but it's not the pepper that we have today, Rashi says. It might be peppermint, because it will fit to the description of the Gemara soon. Maybe that's what it was. But Rashi said that wasn't the pepper that he had in his area. So a small amount is also significant. The itron, liquid tar, kolshuhu. Also, a smallest amount is also significant. Minei psomin, good smelling spices. Uminei matachis, metals. Kol shehin. The smallest amount is also significant. We'll see soon why. Me'avni HaMizbeach, if somehow they repaired the Mizbeach and you had the ruins, you had the broken stones of the Mizbeach, Me'afar HaMizbeach, the broken, the dust from the Mizbeach, Mekak Svarim, the decay of the Sifrei Kodesh, Umekak Mitbuchesei, and the decay of their cloths that you wrap them with, Kol Shuhu, the smallest amount is significant. Why? So for the last four examples from the Mizbeach or from the Svarim or the cloths, you can't just throw them away. You have to put them in Geniza. And therefore the smallest amount is kept, is guarded, and therefore it's considered significant. Rabbi Yehuda on the other extreme as well. Anything which was used to serve Avodah Zarah, that the smallest amount has to be destroyed, so that also is considered significant because they have to remove it. So some say it has to do with Rabbi Yehuda's opinion that a malacha she'eino tzricha legufa, a malacha that you don't have benefit from the actual thing you did an action with, he's also chayiv. So although I don't need the object that I remove, I need the removal, I need the fact that my house does not have it, but that's also considered significant. The Avodah Zarah itself has a certain shear. If it's broken, then it wouldn't be a problem. But things that were used to serve the Avodah Zarah, even the smallest amount, is an issue, and I have to remove them from the house. So the smallest amount is considered significant. Shenemar, as it says, you should not keep in your hand mu'uma, anything, minachayrim, for things that were thrown away because they're connected to Avodah Zarah. Do not keep them in your hand, even a small bit, and therefore the smallest amount has to be destroyed, so it's also considered significant. Pilpeles, this type of pepper, says the Gemara, Kol Shuhu, the smallest amount is significant. Lamai Chazia, if it's food, there's a size for food, a dried fig. How come over here the smallest amount is significant? And the Lamai Chazia, what does it fit for? To help bad breath. Therefore it might be peppermint, if they had it those days in that area, but it's something that you could put in your mouth, a small drop, and that gives a good breath, a good smell to your breath. Itron kolshu, liquid tar, the smallest amount is considered significant. The Maichazi, what does it help for? Litzil chasa, says Rashi, it's when you half of your head hurts, that's a migraine. And what would they do exactly with the tar? I'm not sure. Would they light it or something, just smell it, and maybe smell it and that would help? I'm not sure exactly what. And that would take away the migraine. I imagine to smell it. Like a strong smell that would take away the migraine. Fine. Minich samim kol shein, good smelling spices, the smallest amount could give a good smell. There's no amount for some. You take the smallest amount, the good smell is good, it's good. Fine. Tanu Rabbanon, hamoitzi reach ra. Sometimes it would take ingredients that give a bad smell, and it would also be useful. Kolshu, the smallest amount is useful. They would use it for ill people or children, and they would light it on fire and make a bad smell, and that would chase away evil spirits. That would chase away shindalids, the fact that it's a bad smell, and that's what they would use it for. So the smallest amount is significant. Fine. Shemen toiv, a good smelling oil, also kolshu. Good smelling oil, the smallest amount is significant. Argomon, Rashi explains, is the dye that was used to make, that's as we call it today, purple wool, whether that's accurate or not. Kolshu, the smallest amount, so Rashi says probably had a good smell as well, and therefore the smallest amount is also significant. That's what Rashi explains. Because usually a dye is only significant for a larger amount. But this, Rashi says maybe the fact that it had a good smell as well. Upsula savered, a young rose, one leaf of a young rose, achas, even one of them is significant. Also, it has a good smell, and it has even the smallest amount is significant. Fine. Mini matochis, metals, kol shein, the smallest amount is significant. What can you do with a small piece of metal? Lamai chazu, what is it worth? What is it good for? Tani Rabbi Shimon Elazar Oimer shekin royu lasis v'imani. You could make from it darbon cotton, like a small poker. They would have for the oxen to keep them moving while they're plowing the field. They have like a long stick, and at the end, a small pricky piece of metal. So the smallest amount could be that pricky piece of metal. and they could be useful to help your ox moving. Fine? Although it's not directly connected, but we spoke over here that a small amount of metal is already significant. In the Beis HaMikdash also, iron, a very small amount would be significant. He donates to the Beis HaMikdash iron. Now, what would you use iron for? None of the kelim in the Beis HaMikdash are made out of iron. So, what was iron useful for? Achedim, Rabbi Meir, which is called Achedim, says, Lo yivchos mi amo al amo. He has to donate at least one amo by an amo. L'may chazi, what is it good for? Amar Rav Yosef, l'kal yo'iriv, around the roof or on the whole roof of the Beis HaMikdash, they had things, plates of iron, an amo by an amo, sharp plates, which would make sure that ravens would not rest on the roof of the Beis HaMikdash, and therefore they might leave some lettings over there, and it would be disrespectful for the Beis HaMikdash. So it would have all these sharp pieces of iron on the roof of the Beis HaMikdash, kal yo'iriv, to make sure that the ravens don't rest over there. So that each plate was an amma by an amma, and that's why it's useful. For that, it's useful. So we see also something to do, I guess, with the fact that metals in a small quantity is already useful. Some say the same thing, but that the Brisa said the one thing and Rabbi said the opposite. And the Brisa said, Lo yivchos, the smallest amount of iron you could give is mikal yo'iriv, the amount that's useful to chase away the ravens. V'kama, but how much is that? Amar Rav Yosef, amo al amo, and amo by an amo. Fine. Nechoshes, if one donates to the Beis HaMikdash copper, okay, that was useful, but they had the kelim made out of what would they use it for? They had the things for the mizbeach and nechoshes, all its utensils are made out of copper. So leyivchos mimo kesef. It has to be copper by the value of a ma of silver. That was enough to make, I guess, the smallest utensil they would use for the mizbeach. They didn't have mizbeach and nechoshes in the Beis HaMikdash. They had only the mishkan. What was it? What would they have from the nechoshes? They had the psachter. They had certain things that they used for the mizbeach. They would make out of copper. So what was the significance of the ma kesef? I'm not sure, but that was the amount that was useful from this from copper. Fine. Oh, Tanya Rabbi Lezer Omer, lo yivchos mitzinoira ktana shel nechoshes. He says much smaller than that. You can make a small fork made out of copper. That was also useful. When did they use a small fork made out of copper? L'may chazi, what is that useful for? Amar Rabbi shemechatetin, or some say shemoichatin, ba'as apsilos. By the menorah, they would cut off the burnt tip of the wicks. They would use this copper fork. They also clean out the holders, the candle holders, where you would put the oil on the wicks. Whatever had to be cleaned out, they would use this copper fork. Although they had some golden utensils, zov, Torah, that they would use, but I guess as an extra help, they would use some things. They would use this copper fork, and that's what it was useful for. Right? That was just a side thing regarding the Beis HaMikdash. Back to the Mishnah, we spoke about the decay from Sifrei Kodesh, or from their cloths, that they're useful, they're significant in the smallest amount. Mekak Svarim, the decay of holy Svarim, Mekak Mitpachis, and the decay of their cloths, the coverings, the smallest amount. Okay. Now, the decay of these Svarim was also the name of the bookworms. The worms in Lashon Kodesh had different names. And the name of a bookworm was a makak. So Amar Rabbi Yehuda, makak the sifri, a bookworm, which is called a makak, tachach the shiroi, the worms that eat up all the silk clothes, which was called tachach. V'ilo the inve, the worms in grapes, which was called ilo. uped te'eni, and the worms in figs, which were called peh. V'ha dirimoini, and the worms in pomegranates, which were called ha. Kulu sakanta, they're not just isur, obviously. I mean, not obviously, because it depends if it only appeared after it was detached from this tree and it never left the fruit, then it's not osur, it's kosher. But it's a sakana. It's a sakana. Who tell me that there was a student of a Yosef Kamed Rabbi Yechanan, was sitting in front of Rabbi Yechanan, have a ka'achel ta'ini, and he ate figs. And then Amr, told his Rabbi, koitzim yesh b'ta'inim. He feels something pricking in his throat. It feels like thorns. There must have been thorns in these figs. And the truth was, it wasn't thorns, it was these worms. And basically he passed away from that, this Talmud. And Omar, the figs that is supposed to be Omar, Rabbi Yechanan said, Kotlei peh l'dein. The worm that's called peh had killed this Talmud. Was in these figs, and it was a dangerous worm, and this Talmud had passed away from this peh that was in this fig. Okay, so we spoke about a few more objects, the sizes for carrying them. The next Mishnah continues with a few more. Maybe we'll leave it for next time. So let me just summarize what we said today. Yeah. We started off with dyes, ingredients to make a liquid dye. And we said that the amount that's significant is if it can dye a cloth at the tip of the net that women would wear on their hair. Now, in the earlier Mishnah, we learned that prepared dye is significant even if it could just dye a sample, which is much less. Says the Gemara, yes, prepared dye you would use for a sample. But you wouldn't prepare dye in order to make a sample. And then if you have the ingredients, it must be significant, it must be enough to also dye this cloth at the tip of the net. Then we spoke about different cleansing agents, so ammonia, meraglayim, has to be either just less than 40 days or more than 40 days. Natron has to be from Alexandria. Then the boris has to be, is a plant which is called boris, which is used for soap. And it was a type of ahol. It was not sulfur because it has to be a plant. It was not sand because the Mishnah says there's boris and there's sand. It was a plant which is used for soap. Then he had kimolia, which is shloif deutz. And then he had ashlag, which, as I was told, is potassium. And it used to be found in the hole of pearls, and you have to take it out with a special instrument. Fine. Then we spoke about different plants that even a small amount of them are also significant. So we spoke about a type of pepper, a good smelling pepper, that the smallest amount was significant because it would be used and they would put it in their mouth for bad breath. Good smelling spices are good, the smallest amount. Bad smelling spices, they would also use the smallest amount for people that were ill to take away the bad, evil spirits. The dye for a garment also had a good smell, a good smelling oil, and therefore that also would be significant even in the smallest amount. Same as with a leaf of a young rose. Metals, the smallest amount is significant because it could make the pokey edge of the stick that you would encourage an ox to continue plowing. And then we went on to the Beis Hamikdash that their iron would be significant than Ammon and Ammo, because that would be the help to chase away the ravens. And the copper had to be at least the value of a mo. Then we spoke about the decay, so we spoke about the worms, different types of worms that have different names, which all are a sakana. The worms in svarim, the worms in figs, in grapes, in pomegranates. And they bring a story of a Talmud of Rabbi Yechanan that was affected by the worm that was in a fig.